Hey everybody, another in-depth step-by-step video for you on composition, color, and light. And I know you've been enjoying the quick tips video, the 3-minute or less short tips on how to approach something. This one's going to require a little bit, not even a little bit, it's going to require a lot more in-depth process and thinking to fix the problems and really shape it into the way I saw it. So let's get started. In this demonstration, I want to talk about some things that can be frustrating sometimes. You see something kind of cool, you're not sure. It's one of those kind of things you grab because it's kind of interesting looking. You're not sure what you're going to do with it until later. And if we look at the histogram, again, let's take a look at the top. The histogram's perfect, yet obviously the island in the front is way in shadow. The clouds are too light, but our exposure is perfect. Also, we've got color issues, we've got shadow issues, and also kind of figuring out, gee, what can I do with this? What's wrong? Also, we can see that it's slightly skewed. It's not completely straight. I give myself a pass on this because this is actually on a ferry ride in Scotland. So let's see what we can do with this image and see where it's going to take us and see if Lightroom is going to be the answer or if we're going to need to take it into Photoshop. So let's start with the basic panel. What are the problems? Well, obviously the shadows are too dark, the highlights are too light. So let's bring up the shadows all the way. And let's bring down the highlights all the way. Still doesn't cut it. So let's bring the whites down too, so that we have a little more room on the histogram to boost the overall exposure. Okay, yes, it's looking a little flat. But when we move down the basic panel to the presence sliders, we're going to start to add some contrast here. So we add some texture, some clarity, and this image needs dehaze. It is getting hazy off into the distance, and that does a nice job of starting to bring back some of the detail. Obviously, the color is off and it's desaturated. So let's add a bunch of vibrance. And again, vibrance is a boost to the cooler colors, blues and greens, and then saturation for everything else. So let's try changing the as shot in our white balance to daylight and see if that helps, and it does absolutely nothing. So what we're seeing is, as we've started to adjust this color, the color's kind of shifted a little weird, and this happens a lot on undersaturated colors, particularly with the blues. They seem to shift towards the cyan a little bit. Let's see if we can fix that first. So for that, we're going to come down to the HSL panel, use saturation luminance, click on hue, click on the targeted adjustment tool, and we're going to click in here, we're going to push up. And wow, this, see, you can see if that makes it more cyan. This will take it all the way to purple. We want to have a blue sky, but not with that kind of green in it. All right, that's better. I think maybe it might be a little too saturated. So let's pull the saturation down a little bit. We might come back to that later. And luminance, the brightness of it is good for now. So let's hit done with that. Now, the bottom of the image is dark. We really don't want to lighten this up anymore. In fact, this is the kind of scene that, again, this was a grab shot, but if it had been more planned, this is a time when a graduated neutral density filter on your camera would have helped a lot. But I obviously didn't have one, so let's do it with the Lightroom. I'm going to get the graduated filter, and I'm going to start just above the island and drag up. So if we hit the O key or click on Show Selected Mask Overlay, we get to see what it is we're painting with. That's fine. O to toggle that off. So let's bring up the exposure a little more in the bottom half of the image. Separately, it needs a lot more saturation. Oh, that's a help. And the shadows are still too dark. So let's bring the shadows way up. And I don't think it's still going to be enough. I think we're going to have to bring up the exposure a little more. And now the island itself, while it's looking better, is still potentially a little bit too dark. Also, I don't know that I want to make the clouds that light. Let's bring this down so that the cutoff from the island into the clouds is a little more extreme. Okay, let's hit done on that. Let's zoom in on the island. I'm going to go to 50% up here. And the island's actually looking pretty good. I think some of the shadows are a tad dark. So let's get a brush. We're going to have on auto mask. I'm going to make the brush smaller. Feather, oh, we'll leave it there for now. And I'm going to hit the O so I can see what it's selecting. And yeah, that's kind of what I want. I want to get these dark areas down the bottom. It's okay that it gets the shadows on the water. That's not going to hurt anything. In fact, let's come up in here and get some of these shadow sides as well. All right, so let's hit O to toggle that off. And let's bring up the exposure and we'll open up the shadows. And I think that's looking a heck of a lot better. All right, so let's hit done with that. All right, while we're here, let's fix the rotation of the image. That is driving me nuts. You can't have slanted water, so I'm just going to come down to the bottom, click, and I'm going to eyeball it because you can see the lines, the grid lines, just to the left of the island now are lining up with the water. So that's as much as the images we're going to get to keep. And it's kind of interesting. And by the way, when you're even doing a grab shot, take your time and wait to see when things happen, because the shot I took just before this is right here. And while it's a very similar shot, as the ferry was moving in this direction, the clouds were moving, and you can see I was waiting for the clouds to line up above, so we had this almost kind of mystical look to it. Then we have to decide about cropping. I'm looking at this and I'm thinking this is screaming to be an 11 by 17. And that's what I was thinking when I took it. So I had made a custom size of 11 by 17, and I like it. It does need a vignette. However, I'm not completely thrilled with the color, and I'd like a little more definition in the clouds. So let's try something here first. Let's get the brush again. I've got auto mask on. I'm going to get a nice big brush, and I'm going to select just the clouds. Again, I forgot to hit O. Let's hit O. And I want to come through here and just try to sample out the clouds a bit, because I want to see what happens if we add some more dehaze into the clouds to see if we can bring them out better, or if we're going to be better off going into a third-party plugin like Nix Viveza. So I'm going to hold down the Alt key. I want to get rid of some of the blue that got selected, because if we do dehaze on the blues, what it's going to do is make them darker. All right, so let's hit O, and let's add a bit of dehaze and see what happens. And that helps a lot. It adds some definition to it. Still not completely thrilled with the contrast of the top part of the image. So let's hit done. I want to feature these a little more because these clouds are really kind of strange. Let's do a graduated filter. This time we're going to come from the top down. Actually, I'm going to drag our little dot down to just above the island. Let's see again if we hit dehaze on here over the entire thing. And I do like that. I like what it did to the clouds. Yes, it made the sky a little too dark. That's easy to fix. So let's hit done. Let's go back to HSL and bring up luminance, get our adjustment dot, and let's push that up. And that will make just the blues a little bit lighter. And let's hit done. So I can say I'm pretty happy with where we've come so far. We started out with this, and now we're here, which is, I'm going to go full screen. It's kind of an interesting image. But it needs more, and I'm not particularly thrilled with the color. It's still not quite right. And even though we've tried adjusting to hue and the luminance and the saturation, I'm going to show you my favorite color adjustment in Photoshop. So let's go ahead and send this into Photoshop. Photo, edit in Photoshop, or Command or Control E. So here's our image opened up in Photoshop. And although I really like the composition, it's kind of, I don't know, kind of mystical looking. What I really like is the entire scene is blue except for the small island here, which is kind of cool. That really brings it out. I wish it was taller or something, but it isn't. So here's what we're going to do. This is my favorite way to correct color in an image when you're not sure what it needs. You know something's off. So here's what you do. Over in the Layers panel, we're going to click on the little half-white ball, and we're going to go to Color Balance. We may need to do this more than once. So here's what I like to do. Starting with midtones, I'm going to add a whole bunch of cyan. I just want to see what it looks like. A whole bunch of cyan, whole bunch of red. All right, they both look awful. Now let's back off. A little bit of red, a little bit of cyan. A little bit of red, or a medium bit of red, looks less terrible than the cyan. So what it's telling us is it needs a little bit of red. Probably under 10. Now, just think about right there. Magenta and green aren't frequently off. Let's try it. Let's add a little bit of magenta, a little bit of green, a little bit of magenta, a little bit of green, a very little bit of green maybe. We'll come in about the same. Yellow, blue, yellow, blue. Actually, yellow took some of the sting. It's almost too blue. Let's add a little bit of yellow, since yellow is the opposite of blue, to just cut down on the intensity of the blue. That's looking better. So now let's go to highlights and do the same thing. We'll add a bunch of cyan. No. Now, since we knew the sky was kind of going cyan already, a good idea to not go there. All right, so a lot of red, a lot of cyan. The red improves it. It's going to need a fair amount of red as we look at it. I just want to bring it up enough so I don't see any kind of pink in the clouds. If we go too far, you can see the clouds starting to go colored. But yeah, right about there is actually keeping the clouds neutral but affecting the blue less. Magenta green actually needs a little green in the highlights, so that's interesting. And then yellow blue. Yeah, it needs some yellow. Kind of adds almost like it makes it a little more sunny. So let's add a little bit of yellow. And then lastly, let's do shadows. Same thing. Red. Now red's making the sky go kind of purple. Blue. I don't like cyan rather. I don't like that either. So when you try these changes and they both look kind of terrible, the answer is the balance is good. Leave it alone. We'll do the same thing. Magenta green. Magenta green actually needs a little magenta. Interesting. And then yellow, blue. We'll add a lot of yellow, a lot of blue. Oh, a lot of blue is awful. A lot of yellow is less awful, which generally means it needs a little yellow. But this is somewhat subjective. All right, so let's send this panel over, and let's turn this on and off. Let's just turn it on and off. You can see it's a very subtle correction, but notice how it fixes the problems. It's affected the blues less. It's cleaned up the clouds. They don't have color in them anymore. And it's added a little life to the island. I think that was great. And this is a really good way to fix color when you're not sure what's wrong. You know something's wrong, but you're not sure what's wrong. So what else? I think some burning and dodging is called for. So let's create a blank layer. We'll do that with the little square with the plus in it. I'm going to fill it with 50% gray. So we'll change foreground color to 50% gray. And the reason I'm doing this is because we're going to convert this into an overlay. And remember, overlay makes 50% gray transparent. So when we paint with black, it will darken the image below. When we paint with white, it will lighten it up. So I'm going to get a brush. Just remember, B is the brush key. And we're going to make the brush kind of big. And I just want to paint to start with 10%. So rather than come up to the opacity slider, I'm just going to type 1 on my keyboard, and you can see now it says 10. And I want to darken this areas that's outside of kind of the reflection in the clouds there. Oop, got a little too much there. Let's undo that one. And I'm darkening just these edges here, and I like what it's doing. Also up top, I'm going to kind of do an arc across the top to darken that up a little bit. I like it. And, well, I'm going to vignette it anyway, but I'm going to cut to the chase and darken the edges. Also, while I'm in the clouds, are there some spots that have darkness? You know, I don't want to bring that out darker. So let's see what we've done here. You can see just by that little bit of light painting, we've kind of refocused. I also think that the bottom of the image might need a little more saturation. So let's click on Hue Saturation. Let's add some saturation. Let's add a bunch of saturation. Oh yeah, I like what it did for the island and the bottom. Might be a little too much on top. And that's okay, because what we're going to do is whenever we create one of these adjustment layers, we get a mask. So here's our mask. I'm going to hit the G key, which is for gradient. Now, if you haven't used this before, if I go to click on the gradient, the default is this black to white, or realistically, it's foreground to background color, which is what this is. I want black to transparent, which is the little squares. And I'm going to hold down the Shift key to make this go straight, click right in the middle, and I'm going to drag down. And if we Alt-click on the mask, you can see there's what we got. So I click back on there, I can turn it on and off, and what it's done is it's left the island alone, and the island's got that little bit more of a glow to it, but made the top go less saturated. So one other thing, after you create a mask like this, in fact, let's change this this overlay. Let's change it back to normal just to see what it is we've done. So I just painted a little bit of dark on these spots, but maybe I want them to blend a little bit more. So what we can do is actually blur the layer. So let's go to filter blur. We'll choose Gaussian blur. And let's add a bunch. There we go. You see how that just softened up a bit? So now when we change this back to overlay, now the transitions here, as we turn this on and off, are softer. And that's really what it needed. I think I might want to bring down the saturation of the blue a little bit, but I think in order to make it easy, we'll do that back in Lightroom. So let's hit Command S to save that. So here's our image back in Lightroom, and I think I just want to bring the saturation of the blue down just a little bit. Let's see, just a little, just a smidge. Maybe, yeah, just that much. And if we turn this on and off, we can see the before and after. And yeah, just a very little bit. And I'm really happy with it. You think that we started here and we ended up there. Let's see them side by side. I'll hit the C key, Shift Tab, LL. And there's our after and our before. Certainly a much more interesting image. And this is what really translated what I was after as I saw this scene. This kind of vertical composition with the clouds coming up with the island as a base. So let's turn off C. Yeah, there it is. Full screen. We started with this. We ended up with that. Much more interesting. And I know you guys are really enjoying the quick tips videos that I'm doing, the 3-minute or less, but some of this stuff just does require a deeper dive. So that's why I'm going to continue to produce both the in-depth step-by-step videos and the quick tips for getting the quicker things done. So that's it for this demo. Hope you enjoyed that. Hope it opened up your eyes to thinking about how to approach when you have something that was a grab shot that did not work out of the camera, but you still saw the composition and there was something interesting about it. So thanks for watching. See you online again soon. Be well until next time. Bye-bye.